Hi everybody, nice to have you here. Henrik here, Vilnius Permaculture. So I'm inside here because it's storm outside and raining. I don't know if you hear it, but it's a little bit crazy. So therefore, me and Shio was out in the food forest today and picking apples. That was not the plan, but we had to go out because this night there was a storm. So I was thinking, well, maybe a lot of apple have fallen down. So I have to go out and pick them up so they don't get bad. You know, you should not waste food. So we went down there and of course there was a lot of apple. So we filled the bag, 8 kilos, and come back here just in time before this crazy rain starts. So I don't say anything about rain. I love rain. We really need it because it's so dry here in Lithuania. And I guess it's the same a little bit everywhere in the world. But we have come to next part of building a food forest, part 5, let's say. And because I had to go out there and pick the apples today, I was thinking about what should part 5 be about. Well, that's about planning or thinking more than planning, because we have talked about the nice thing about choosing trees, fruit trees and berries, berry trees and nut trees and so on. So that is one of these really nice things to do, sitting there and choosing. But when we do that, it's easy to be a little bit too excited. We will take apple trees because this is easy one. Up here in Scandinavia and Baltic, apple trees a little bit special because we have so many varieties of it, so many different kind of tastes and so many things of aspects, and we do a lot with apples. It's a big part of our culture. So if you have one apple tree, in the beginning don't give so much. So you're thinking, well, I will have a lot of apple trees. But then, now it's the theme of today. You will have a lot of apples, more than you think. So it could be a problem more than a nice thing to have, because there's so much people all over this area in these countries that just don't care about their apples. Well, they have picked a lot of apples and they store them, some of them down in their cellar, and now they have apple for the winter. But all the other apples, yeah, it goes just go into the compost. So when we think about planning, we also have to think 10, 15 years ahead and see how would this looks like in 15 years. How much yield will I get from my food forest? So maybe it should not be so big, or maybe you want to make it more commercial, and then you have to think about that. I must have at least this amount of fruit trees or nut trees so that I can earn a living on it. But normally we don't build a little food forest for, industrial business. It's maybe it works. Nobody knows, because this with having and building food forests up here in the northern hemisphere is new. It's relatively new, and there is not so many examples of this in the world. So we have no statistics of how it would work and so on. We just know that it's for people who have a food forest and have had them for a long time. They have an enormous amount of yield in many different categories, berry, nuts, fruits, vegetables, salads, everything. Much more than what a normal agriculture land would give. But they also treat it different. They also have put more love into the work of building it and so on. So of course. So here we have this. If you have an apple tree and it becomes big, I always buy traditional wild rootstocks and so on for apple and so on. I don't mess around with these hybrids and so on because, yeah, there's a lot of problems with them. So at least not buying this dwarf variety or so on. Just buy a real tree. And if you have just little space in your garden and so on, still buy a normal tree and then prune it, cut it so it's have the correct size. Don't go for these dwarf stocks and so on. They are worthless trees. So here's the experiment. Instead of thinking in trees in your food forest, because we tend to do that. I want that kind of tree, I want that kind of tree, and so on. When we think about this tree, we convert it. We think like this. Think in yield instead. So often where we buy the trees, or you can also probably find it on the internet, there is figures, there is statistics on how much a nut tree will yield after a couple of years, or a walnut, or after a couple of years, an apple tree, so on. So you can estimate around how much yield you will have from a tree. And then this experiment, what you can do is to think in yield instead of in trees. And then you have to think, how much do I, my family, my friends and neighbors and so on, how much apple do we need for a year, for making apple pies and so on, eating and so on. And so this is a good training for the future to see and learn and maybe figure out more ways to use the yield, the fruits from your food forest. And you figure out, yeah, we actually want to have one apple a day. Yes, and we are if you're one person, it's a certain amount. If you're two person, maybe it's yes, 365 apple times 2, and that used to be 160 kilos. So you actually, if you want to eat one apple a day and you are two people, it's 160 kilo of apple. So how many trees do you need? Yeah, you only need 2 trees, let's say. But then, yeah, but it can be a bad year. So okay, I have 3 trees, but I will not have 10. So, and then you take other things that you want, the plum trees. And then when you come to plum, you see, oh, you have to actually treat and think about a plum tree different from an apple tree, because apple trees, the apple you can store as they are, and of course you can dry and you can do apple juice and so on. Many things. Plum trees, the plum is not an apple, it's a different fruit, and you have to take care of it different. And nice thing with plums is that when you have new fresh plums, you can eat and eat and eat. Yes, you have to eat. That's just what's happened when you have plum trees. When they are fresh and so on, you're just going there and put in your mouth the whole day. And these you cannot store. You cannot freeze them and store them in different ways. So you have to do them. So do something with them. And they are a little bit more complicated maybe for you than with apples. So do I want to have that work with these plums? So maybe you start to think, what should I do with 200 kilos of plums? Oh, that's a problem. Yeah, that's too much for me. Maybe I only want one tree. And the same goes with cherries and pears and some of these fruits. So later in the future, I will talk about trees that demands a lot of you, that takes a lot of work for you to have these trees, like apple trees and pears and so on. They are trees that need much attention actually. And then you have other trees that do not need any attention. So that means you can actually have a lot of trees that don't need any attention from you. They can just be there, and if you don't do anything with them, the birds take care of the rest, no problem. But then you have like a apple tree or plum tree, things will fall down and they will create a mess, like mulberry trees and so on. So the trees are not the same. So when you do this exercise with yield, you will find out that it's just not a bunch of trees. All trees are different, and they demand different things from you, and they yield different. And how much do you want of out of every fruit or nuts and so on? And that will help you decide how big and how many trees and what kind of trees you want. So that makes it a little bit easier to see the size of your food forest as an experiment, just to check how much yield will I have, what should I do with this yield, do we eat it, do we eat much of it, will I create a marmalade industry? So because some years when everything is right, you will have too much, and some year you will have less. So then you plan, okay, as we say, I only need 2 apple trees, but I put in 3 in case, and the same with all these kinds of trees that you want. So theme of the day, do this experiment with checking yields instead of an amount of trees, and you will see maybe you need much less than you think, and some trees you actually need a little bit more of. So yeah, sometimes we have a little bit too much. Have a nice day.